Hey, tech girl! You checking if our scopes are clean enough for your standards?
Staff Sergeant Blake Morrison's voice boomed across Camp Lejeune's rifle range, making every Marine sniper turn to look at the small woman kneeling beside the equipment crates. Vera Mitchell, barely 5'4" in her faded gray t-shirt and worn combat boots, didn't look up from her clipboard as she methodically checked serial numbers on the M40A6 rifles. Blake strutted over, his 6'2" frame casting a shadow over her workspace. Behind him, Corporal Derek Hayes and the rest of the elite sniper team snickered, phones already out to record what they assumed would be easy entertainment. Seriously, what are you even doing here? This is Marine sniper training, not a daycare. Vera finally glanced up, her blue eyes calm despite the circle of intimidating faces surrounding her. Just doing my job, Sergeant. Her voice was quiet, almost apologetic, which only made the group laugh harder. Your job? Blake grabbed one of the rifles from the crate, handling it with the casual arrogance of someone who had never missed a target that mattered. Lady, your job is maintenance. Our job is precision. There's a difference. Derek kicked at her clipboard, sending papers scattering across the concrete. Yeah, stick to cleaning toilets and leave the real weapons to real Marines. What none of them knew was that in exactly 17 minutes, when that gray t-shirt tore during a confrontation, none of them saw coming, they would discover something that would make every single person on this range question everything they thought they understood about skill, respect, and the woman they'd just made the biggest mistake of their military careers dismissing. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the North Carolina rifle range, creating heat mirages that danced above the asphalt. Blake Morrison surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of a king reviewing his court. At 28, he commanded the respect that came with being the top-rated sniper instructor at Camp Lejeune. His chest bore the kind of ribbon rack that made junior Marines step aside in hallways, and his voice carried the authority of someone who'd never been challenged by anyone he considered beneath him, which, at this moment, included the maintenance technician who had somehow wandered into his sacred space. Blake continued his verbal assault, while Vera methodically gathered her scattered papers. Look at this, Marines. This is what happens when the Corps gets soft. Pretty soon they'll be sending kindergarten teachers to check our weapons. He kicked at her equipment bag, sending a small wrench skittering across the concrete. What's next? Gonna teach us how to braid friendship bracelets? The sniper team erupted in laughter. Derek Hayes, whose social media following had grown substantially thanks to videos of him humiliating civilians and junior enlisted, saw an opportunity for content gold. He positioned his phone for the perfect angle, already crafting the caption in his mind. Maintenance Karen tries to school Marines. But as Vera bent to retrieve the scattered equipment, something caught the attention of Master Sergeant Wade Harrison, who'd been observing from the elevated platform 30 meters away. The way she moved, fluid, economical, with a spatial awareness that extended beyond her immediate task, triggered a memory from his 30 years of service. Her posture while kneeling wasn't the awkward crouch of someone unused to gear. It was the practiced stance of someone who'd spent countless hours in similar positions. Someone who understood that comfort and efficiency mattered when lives depended on split-second timing. Harrison adjusted his binoculars and focused on the small woman. Something about her bearing, the way she automatically checked her 6 o'clock position while working, sent a familiar chill down his spine. He'd seen that level of tactical awareness before, but only in operators who'd earned it through blood and fire. Vera's movements as she reorganized her scattered paperwork were too precise, too methodical. Each paper found its designated place in her clipboard with mechanical efficiency. No wasted motion, no frustrated gestures despite the harassment. When Derek deliberately stepped on one of her maintenance forms, grinding his boot heel into the paper, she simply pulled a replacement from her bag without comment or visible irritation. Holy cow, Derek laughed, filming the interaction. She's got backups for everything. What are you, some kind of robot? Vera looked up at him with those unnervingly calm blue eyes. I like to be prepared. Blake sensed he was losing his audience's attention and decided to escalate. He grabbed another brass casing from the nearby collection bucket and flicked it directly at her head. The metal struck her temple with a sharp ping, hard enough to sting, hard enough to humiliate. That's when everyone witnessed something impossible. Without looking up from her clipboard, without any apparent awareness of the incoming projectile, Vera's left hand moved in a fluid arc and caught the brass casing mid-flight. The motion was so natural, so unconsciously precise, that for a moment nobody processed what had just happened. She held the casing for exactly 2 seconds, examining the head stamp with professional interest, then set it aside and returned to her paperwork. The laughter died. Derek's phone wavered in his grip. Blake's confident smirk faltered as his brain struggled to rationalize what he'd witnessed. Catching a flicked piece of brass required the kind of peripheral vision and reflexes that couldn't be faked, couldn't be lucky. It was the automatic response of someone whose survival had once depended on tracking multiple moving objects in her environment simultaneously. "What the hell was that?" Blake demanded, his voice carrying an edge of uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. Vera looked up with the same mild expression she'd maintained throughout the harassment. "What was what, Sergeant?" If you're already feeling that surge of anger watching Vera endure this treatment, you're exactly where you need to be. Hit that like button right now and subscribe, because this story is about to show you why the most dangerous person in the room is often the one no one expects. And I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Drop a comment and tell me what country you're in. I love seeing how these stories of hidden strength reach people all around the world. Now, let's see what happens when Blake pushes too far. Lieutenant Carter Brooks chose that moment to join the gathering, drawn by the unusual quiet that had settled over what should have been a raucous morning of harassment. Carter was the kind of officer who had graduated near the top of his class at Quantico, but had never quite managed to earn the genuine respect of the enlisted Marines under his command. He compensated for this deficit with an aggressive adherence to regulations and a tendency to question anyone whose presence he couldn't immediately explain. "What's the situation here?" Carter's voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd read leadership manuals, but had never led men in actual combat. His eyes fixed on Vera with the predatory interest of a bureaucrat who'd found an irregularity to investigate. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your authorization to be in this restricted training area." Vera reached into her back pocket and produced a laminated card that she handed over without comment. Carter examined it with the theatrical thoroughness of someone performing for an audience, his frown deepening as he read. "Vera Mitchell, civilian contractor, equipment maintenance specialist." He looked up from the card with suspicious eyes. "This authorization is pretty broad. Who specifically requested your services today?" "Colonel Patterson's office," Vera replied. "Routine inspection of long-range weapon systems." The mention of the base commander's name should have ended the questioning, but Carter was too committed to his performance to back down gracefully. "I'll need to verify that. In the meantime, I think it would be appropriate for you to observe from a distance while we conduct actual training." Private Grace Coleman had been watching the interaction from her position near the ammunition storage area, her discomfort growing with each escalating moment. At 19, Grace had joined the Marines with dreams of serving something greater than herself. But the reality of military culture had proven more complicated than the recruiting videos had suggested. She'd witnessed too many incidents like this one, too many examples of power being used to humiliate rather than instruct. "Sir," Grace stepped forward, her voice steady despite the nervous energy radiating from her small frame. "The maintenance request came down through proper channels. I processed the paperwork yesterday." Blake wheeled on her with the fury of someone whose authority had been questioned by the lowest rank present. "Did someone ask for your input, Private? Because I'm pretty sure nobody did." Grace's cheeks flushed, but she maintained her position. "No, Sergeant, but the lady's just doing her job." "Her job," Blake repeated with venomous emphasis, "is to stay out of our way while we do ours. Your job is to keep your mouth shut unless you're spoken to." He stepped closer to Grace, using his height and bulk to intimidate. "Maybe you'd like to join our maintenance friend in observing from a distance. I'm sure there's a broom closet somewhere that could use your attention." The casual cruelty in Blake's voice sparked something dangerous in Vera's eyes, a flash of steel that came and went so quickly that only Harrison, still watching through his binoculars, caught it. For just a moment, the mild-mannered maintenance worker disappeared, replaced by something harder, more predatory. Then the mask slipped back into place, and she was once again the unremarkable civilian contractor who had somehow wandered into a world where she didn't belong. But Harrison had seen enough. He began making his way down from the observation platform, his weathered face set in lines that his Marines knew meant trouble for someone. 30 years of service had taught him to recognize different types of people, and the woman being harassed by his subordinates triggered every instinctual alarm he possessed. The way she moved when she thought nobody was watching, the automatic situational awareness that kept her positioned with clear sight lines to all exits, the unconscious habit of checking her 6 o'clock position every 37 seconds, a rhythm so precise it could only have been drilled into muscle memory through countless repetitions in environments where such vigilance meant survival. Master Sergeant Harrison had seen that exact behavioral pattern before, but only in operators who'd earned their paranoia through extended deployments in contested territory. Only in people who'd learned that relaxing your guard for even a moment could result in a body bag with your name on it. Blake, oblivious to Harrison's approach, decided to escalate the situation further. He reached for Vera's shoulder, intending to physically guide her away from the equipment she'd been inspecting. "Come on, lady. Time to move along before you hurt yourself." His hand never made contact. Vera's response was so subtle that most observers missed it entirely. She simply shifted her weight 6 inches to the left while taking a half step forward, causing Blake's grab to encounter empty air. The movement looked like a casual adjustment of position, but Harrison recognized it immediately as a classical evasion technique that required years of training to execute so smoothly. Blake, off balance from his failed grab, stumbled slightly and shot Vera a look of pure hatred. "Think you're pretty smart, don't you?" "I just moved, Sergeant, no disrespect intended." The mildness of her response, the complete absence of fear or defiance, seemed to infuriate Blake even more. He was accustomed to reactions he could categorize: anger, fear, defiance, submission. Vera's calm neutrality fell outside his understanding of how intimidation was supposed to work, and his confusion manifested as increased aggression. "You know what? I think you need to learn some respect for what we do here." Blake gestured toward the range, where targets were positioned at various distances from 200 to 800 meters. "Since you are so interested in our weapons, maybe you'd like a demonstration of what real marksmanship looks like." Derek's eyes lit up with anticipation. This was exactly the kind of content that drove engagement on his social media channels. Civilians being put in their place by superior Marine training. He adjusted his phone's angle and hit record, already imagining the views and comments this video would generate. "Actually," Derek chimed in, "why don't we let maintenance give it a try? See if civilian training measures up to Marine standards." His tone made it clear that he expected nothing but humiliating failure. Failure that would be documented and shared with his 23,000 followers. Vera looked toward the firing line with an expression that might have been mild curiosity. "I wouldn't want to interfere with your training schedule." Blake laughed, a harsh sound that carried no warmth. "Oh, I insist. Consider it part of your education. Help you understand what real professionals do for a living." Lieutenant Carter Brooks nodded approvingly, seeing an opportunity to demonstrate leadership through public correction. "Actually, that's not a bad idea. Might help our civilian contractor develop appropriate respect for Marine capabilities." The gathering crowd of Marines sensed blood in the water. Word spread quickly through the range that the maintenance lady was about to embarrass herself with the weapons she'd been checking. Phones emerged from pockets as Marines positioned themselves for the best view of what promised to be spectacular humiliation. Harrison finally reached the group, his approach unnoticed by everyone except Vera, who tracked his movement with peripheral vision while maintaining apparent focus on the conversation. Something in his weathered face suggested he'd seen enough of this particular show. "What's the situation here, Sergeant Morrison?" Harrison's voice carried the quiet authority that came from 3 decades of military service, including 2 tours in Vietnam and countless training evolutions that had separated the competent from the catastrophic. Blake straightened slightly, though he maintained his aggressive posture. "Just giving our civilian contractor a demonstration of Marine marksmanship, Master Sergeant. Help her understand what she's inspecting." Harrison's eyes found Vera's face, searching for something he couldn't quite name. "That's so? And our contractor is interested in this demonstration?" "She seems curious about our capabilities," Blake replied, his tone suggesting that such curiosity was presumptuous and would be corrected through public humiliation. "Curious," Harrison repeated thoughtfully. He'd been watching Vera's behavior for the past 15 minutes, cataloging details that didn't fit the profile of a typical civilian contractor. The way she'd automatically positioned herself with clear lines of sight to 3 separate exits. The unconscious habit of keeping her back to hard cover whenever possible. The professional interest with which she'd examined the rifle serial numbers, not the casual inspection of someone checking boxes on a maintenance form, but the thorough evaluation of someone who understood exactly what those numbers meant. Most telling of all was her complete lack of reaction to the harassment. Harrison had seen plenty of civilians subjected to military intimidation tactics, and they invariably responded with some combination of anger, fear, confusion, or attempts at de-escalation. Vera displayed none of these reactions. She endured the abuse with the stoic patience of someone who'd faced far worse and survived. That kind of composure didn't develop in civilian environments. It was forged in places where emotional reactions could get you killed, where maintaining operational security meant never revealing more than absolutely necessary about your capabilities or background. The range fell into an expectant hush as Vera approached the firing line. Derek positioned himself for optimal filming angles while providing running commentary for his audience. Okay, guys, so this maintenance worker thinks she can hang with Marine snipers. This is about to be painful to watch. Blake selected an M40A6 from the weapon rack and handed it to Vera with exaggerated care, as if passing a complex piece of equipment to a child. Now, this is a precision instrument. 700-meter effective range requires extensive training to operate safely. Think you can handle it? Vera accepted the rifle and immediately began what appeared to be a standard safety inspection. She checked the chamber, verified the safety mechanism, and examined the scope mounting with movements that were both efficient and thorough. But Harrison noticed details that escaped the others. The way her hands found the proper grip positions without visual guidance. The automatic checking of barrel alignment that suggested intimate familiarity with the weapon system. The professional assessment of scope calibration that took exactly 18 seconds to complete. "Looks good," Vera said simply, settling into a prone position behind the rifle. Blake pointed toward a target positioned at 300 meters. "Let's start easy. See if you can hit the paper." The casual dismissiveness in his voice drew laughter from the assembled Marines, most of whom were anticipating a spectacular miss that would provide entertainment for months to come. Derek narrated the scene for his phone camera, his voice dripping with condescension. "So, our maintenance expert is about to show us how civilian training compares to Marine Corps standards. My money says she doesn't even hit the target stand." Vera settled behind the rifle, with movements that looked awkward to the casual observer, but suggested something different to Harrison's experienced eye. She was adjusting for factors that civilian shooters rarely considered: wind speed and direction, barometric pressure, the slight elevation difference between her position and the target. Her breathing pattern shifted into the controlled rhythm that snipers used to manage their natural respiratory cycle, timing shots for the natural pause between heartbeats. "Take your time," Blake said mockingly. "We've got all day." Vera's response was a single shot that rang out across the range with crisp authority. The impact was immediately visible through the spotting scopes. A perfect center mass hit that struck the bullseye with precision that bordered on the impossible for someone supposedly unfamiliar with the weapon system. The laughter died instantly. Derek's phone captured the moment of stunned silence as Marines processed what they'd just witnessed. Blake stared at the target in disbelief, his confident smirk fading into confusion. "Lucky shot," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Vera replied mildly, cycling the bolt to chamber another round. The second shot struck within millimeters of the first, creating what appeared to be a single enlarged hole in the target's center ring. The third shot followed with mechanical precision, then the fourth and fifth, each round placed with an accuracy that defied explanation. Derek's social media commentary faltered into stammering confusion. That's not possible. Nobody shoots like that without extensive training." Harrison stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Miss Mitchell, where did you learn to shoot?" "Here and there," Vera replied, safing the weapon and setting it aside. "Picked it up over the years." The vagueness of her answer only heightened the mystery. Harrison had been around military marksmanship training for 3 decades, and he'd never seen a civilian display that level of precision without some form of professional instruction. The shot grouping he'd just witnessed would have been impressive for a Marine with years of sniper training. For a maintenance contractor, it was incomprehensible. The advanced stabilization system Vera used to compensate for her equipment required military-grade hand braces with micro-servo technology. These specialized medical devices, originally developed for combat surgeons operating under fire, feature carbon fiber construction and real-time tremor compensation algorithms. The prescription nerve blockers she carried represented cutting-edge neurological treatment, costing more per dose than most people's monthly salary, designed specifically for operators dealing with combat-induced nerve lethargy while maintaining peak performance capabilities. Blake, refusing to accept what he'd witnessed, gestured toward a target positioned at 500 meters. "Okay, so you got lucky with the close shots. Let's see how you do with a real challenge." The dismissal in his voice couldn't quite mask the uncertainty that had crept into his demeanor. 500 meters represented the outer edge of what most Marines could handle reliably, requiring not just marksmanship skills, but an understanding of ballistics, environmental factors, and advanced shooting techniques that took years to master. Vera looked toward the distant target and nodded slightly. "If you think it would be helpful." She resumed her position behind the rifle, but this time Harrison was close enough to observe her technique in detail. What he saw confirmed every suspicion that had been building over the past 30 minutes. Vera's body alignment was textbook perfect, her grip consistent with advanced sniper training, her breathing pattern exactly what he'd expect from someone with extensive combat experience. Most telling was the way she read environmental conditions. Before taking her shot, she observed wind indicators that most casual shooters would never notice. The movement of grass near the target, the behavior of heat mirages, the barely perceptible drift of dust particles. She was calculating variables that required both training and experience to assess accurately. The shot that followed was even more impressive than her performance at 300 meters. The bullet struck the 500-meter target with precision that would have earned recognition at a professional sniper competition. The skills we just witnessed aren't beginner's luck. If you're starting to suspect there's much more to Vera's story, make sure you're subscribed, because what's coming next will blow your mind. Share this with someone who needs to see what real competence looks like. Carter Brooks had been making discreet phone calls during Vera's shooting demonstration, and the expression on his face suggested that his inquiries had yielded disturbing results. He approached Harrison with a tablet displaying information that made both men frown. "Master Sergeant, we might have a problem. I ran Miss Mitchell's identification through the security database, and there are some unusual flags." Harrison accepted the tablet and scrolled through screens of information, his frown deepening with each line of text. Most of Vera's background information was standard contractor data: education, previous employment, security clearance level. But embedded within the routine information were anomalies that raised immediate questions. Her listed previous employment included several organizations that Harrison recognized as cover identities for classified programs. Her security clearance was several levels higher than would normally be required for equipment maintenance. Most puzzling was a series of deployment records that were heavily redacted, with dates and locations blacked out in a pattern that suggested involvement in operations that officially didn't exist. "This doesn't make sense," Harrison muttered. "Why would someone with this kind of background be working maintenance contracts?" Blake, who had been growing increasingly agitated as Vera's shooting performance demolished his assumptions, overheard the comment and latched onto it as vindication of his suspicions. "I knew something was off about her. Nobody just shows up out of nowhere and shoots like that." His accusation drew the attention of the growing crowd of Marines who had gathered to witness what they'd expected to be routine humiliation, but had instead become something far more mysterious. Phones were recording from multiple angles now, capturing not just Vera's impossible marksmanship, but the growing tension among the instructors who were supposed to understand what was happening. Derek, whose social media instincts had been finely honed by months of viral content creation, sensed that he was documenting something bigger than a simple embarrassment video. "Hey everyone, so this maintenance lady just outshot our Marine snipers, and now there's some question about her background. This is getting really weird." Vera, apparently oblivious to the controversy swirling around her, had returned to her equipment inspection with the same methodical attention she'd shown earlier. But Harrison noticed that her positioning had shifted slightly. She now had clear sight lines to 2 exits while maintaining awareness of everyone in her vicinity. The change was subtle enough that most observers missed it entirely, but Harrison recognized the tactical repositioning of someone who sensed potential threat development. Combined with her shooting performance and the anomalies in her background, Vera's behavior was painting a picture that made Harrison increasingly uncomfortable. Grace Coleman, who had been quietly observing from the periphery, approached Vera with the kind of hesitant respect that extraordinary performance commanded. "Ma'am, that was incredible shooting. I've never seen anything like it." Vera looked up from her clipboard with a slight smile. "Thank you, Private. Your instructors are very skilled. I just got lucky." The modesty in her response only deepened the mystery. Harrison had been around enough genuine experts to recognize the difference between false humility and the real thing. Vera wasn't downplaying her abilities to avoid attention. She genuinely seemed to consider her performance unremarkable, which suggested a level of competence that made her demonstration shots look like casual warm-up exercises. Blake, desperate to reassert his authority and, growing increasingly frustrated by his inability to categorize or dismiss Vera, decided on a more direct approach. "You know what? I think we need some answers here. Nobody shoots like that without serious training, and I want to know where you got it." His accusatory tone carried an implicit threat, the suggestion that Vera's presence represented some form of deception or security risk. Several Marines nodded agreement, their professional paranoia activated by the combination of exceptional performance and mysterious background. Vera set down her clipboard and looked directly at Blake with eyes that held neither fear nor defiance, just a mild curiosity about where this confrontation might lead. "I'm sorry if my shooting was inappropriate, Sergeant. I was just trying to be helpful." The complete absence of defensiveness in her response seemed to frustrate Blake even more. He was accustomed to reactions he could work with: anger that justified escalation, fear that confirmed his dominance, defiance that warranted punishment. Vera's calm acceptance offered no leverage for the kind of psychological warfare that had served him well throughout his career. Harrison intervened before Blake could escalate further. "Sergeant Morrison, why don't you continue with the scheduled training evolution? I'll handle our contractor situation." Blake's expression suggested he wanted to argue, but Harrison's tone carried the weight of 3 decades of military service and wasn't open to debate. "Yes, Master Sergeant. Marines, back to your positions." As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, Harrison studied Vera with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Her equipment inspection had resumed with the same methodical precision, but he noticed details that painted an increasingly complex picture. The way she handled the rifles suggested intimate familiarity with not just the M40A6 system, but several related variants. Her inspection checklist covered components that most maintenance contractors wouldn't know existed. Most intriguingly, she occasionally paused to make notations that looked less like maintenance observations and more like tactical assessments. "Miss Mitchell," Harrison said carefully, "I'm curious about your background. Your shooting suggests professional training." Vera looked up from a scope adjustment she'd been evaluating. "I've always been interested in precision shooting, Master Sergeant. Spent some time at civilian training courses." It was a plausible explanation that answered Harrison's question without providing any useful information. The kind of response that someone with operational security training would give when questioned about capabilities they preferred to keep private. Harrison had heard similar deflections from special operations personnel who'd learned that revealing too much about their background could compromise ongoing missions or create security complications. The pattern was familiar enough to increase his suspicions rather than allay them. Carter Brooks chose that moment to return with additional information that he clearly considered significant. "Master Sergeant, I managed to reach Colonel Patterson's office. There's no record of any equipment maintenance request for today." The revelation created an immediate shift in atmosphere. Marines who had been drifting back to their training positions turned their attention back to Vera, their expressions now showing the kind of suspicion that security breaches generated on military installations. Blake, vindicated by the confirmation that something irregular was occurring, stepped forward with renewed confidence. "So, our maintenance expert isn't supposed to be here after all. Interesting." Vera's reaction was the first sign of genuine concern she'd displayed since arriving at the range. She reached into her pocket and produced a work order that she handed to Carter with steady hands. "This is the authorization I received yesterday. Maybe there was a communication breakdown." Carter examined the document with the thoroughness of someone who understood that administrative irregularities could indicate serious security problems. The work order appeared legitimate, complete with proper signatures and reference numbers, but the timing discrepancy suggested either bureaucratic confusion or deliberate deception. "The paperwork looks authentic," Carter admitted, "but the timing doesn't match what Colonel Patterson's office has on record." Harrison studied Vera's face for signs of deception or anxiety. What he saw instead was the calm attention of someone processing new information and calculating responses. Not the confusion or concern that innocent parties typically displayed when questioned about administrative irregularities, but the analytical focus of someone trained to assess and respond to developing situations. The radio on Harrison's belt crackled to life with a transmission that immediately commanded everyone's attention. "All units, this is base operations. We have unconfirmed reports of suspicious activity near the north perimeter. Increase security posture to Bravo. All personnel remain alert." The transmission transformed the atmosphere from suspicious curiosity to professional alertness. Marines automatically shifted into more tactical formations. Weapons handling became more precise, and conversations dropped to the low tones that indicated heightened awareness. Vera's response to the security alert was the most telling indicator yet of her true background. Instead of the confusion or concern that civilians typically displayed during military security alerts, she demonstrated the automatic situational assessment of someone with extensive tactical training. Her eyes swept the range in a pattern that evaluated potential threats, escape routes, and defensive positions with mechanical efficiency. Her body language shifted from relaxed attention to coiled readiness without any apparent conscious decision. Most significantly, her hands moved to positions that would allow rapid access to equipment or weapons if circumstances required immediate action. Harrison caught every detail of her transformation and felt his suspicions crystallize into near certainty. The woman standing before him wasn't a maintenance contractor who'd somehow acquired exceptional marksmanship skills. She was an operator, someone with the kind of training and experience that the military spent years and enormous resources to develop. The question was why someone with her obvious capabilities was working under a cover identity that didn't match her skill set, and why she'd chosen to reveal those capabilities in such a public manner when operational security would normally require maintaining her assumed role, regardless of personal cost. Blake, focused on his immediate concerns about unauthorized presence on his range, missed the subtle indicators that had captured Harrison's attention. Okay, so we've got suspicious activity on base and an unauthorized contractor with mysterious shooting skills. Maybe it's time to call security. The suggestion created immediate tension among the Marines present. If Vera represented some form of security threat, detaining her would be the appropriate response. But if she was operating under legitimate authority that hadn't been properly communicated, treating her as a potential threat could create significant problems for everyone involved. Grace Coleman, who had been watching Vera's behavior since the security alert, noticed something that the others had missed. "Master Sergeant, look at her hands." Harrison focused on Vera's hands and immediately understood Grace's observation. Vera's grip on her clipboard had shifted into what was unmistakably a tactical hold, positioning the seemingly innocent object as an improvised weapon that could be deployed in multiple ways if circumstances required. It was a subtle adjustment that most people would never notice, but it represented years of training in environments where any object could become a weapon, and survival depended on maintaining readiness for violence, even in apparently safe situations. The comprehensive military contractor insurance that covered Vera's classified identity protection utilized advanced financial privacy protocols worth millions in coverage. These specialized policies, designed for high-risk government operations, included identity protection services, medical coverage for combat injuries, and financial security systems that could maintain multiple legitimate identities across decades of service, representing the pinnacle of executive protection insurance programs. The sound of approaching vehicles drew everyone's attention toward the access road where a convoy of military police vehicles was heading in their direction. The timing suggested that someone had already reported the administrative irregularities and requested official intervention. Blake smiled with satisfaction. "Looks like we're about to get some answers." But Harrison was watching Vera's face and saw something that made his blood run cold. Her expression held neither fear nor anxiety about the approaching authorities. Instead, her eyes showed the calculating assessment of someone evaluating tactical options in a developing situation. It was the look of a predator deciding whether circumstances required fight or flight. The lead military police vehicle reached the range entrance and discharged 4 MPs who approached with the professional caution that security alerts demanded. Their leader, Staff Sergeant Williams, approached Harrison with the respectful authority that protocol required. "Master Sergeant, we receive reports of unauthorized personnel in this training area. Base operations requested we investigate." Harrison indicated Vera with a slight gesture. "Miss Mitchell here. Some questions about her authorization and background." Williams studied Vera with the trained eye of someone whose job required accurately assessing potential threats. What he saw was a small woman in civilian clothes who appeared appropriately cooperative and non-threatening. His initial assessment matched what everyone else had concluded upon first seeing her: unremarkable civilian contractor who'd somehow created administrative confusion. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your identification and authorization documents." Vera complied immediately, producing her ID card and work order with the smooth efficiency of someone accustomed to official scrutiny. Williams examined both documents carefully, comparing information and checking for obvious signs of forgery or alteration. Everything appears to be in order, Williams concluded, but we'll need to verify the authorization through proper channels. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to accompany us while we sort this out. It was a reasonable request delivered with professional courtesy. Under normal circumstances, any innocent party would comply without objection and expect the administrative confusion to be resolved quickly through proper channels. Vera's response was a slight nod of acceptance that should have ended the matter, but Harrison noticed that her positioning had shifted again, placing her within arm's reach of the nearest rifle rack while maintaining clear sight lines to multiple exit routes. She was preparing for something that hadn't happened yet. The realization hit Harrison like a physical blow. Vera knew something that the rest of them didn't. The security alert, the administrative irregularities, the timing of the military police response. She was reading patterns and drawing conclusions that suggested the situation was more complex than it appeared. Before Harrison could voice his concerns, the radio transmission that changed everything crackled across the range with crystal clarity. All units, we have confirmed hostile activity. North perimeter has been breached. This is not a drill. All personnel take cover immediately. We are under attack. The words hit the assembled Marines like a shockwave. Training exercises and security alerts were routine, but actual attacks on American military installations were the stuff of nightmares that kept security personnel awake at night. Blake's confident demeanor evaporated instantly. Derek's phone captured the moment when entertainment became terror. The military police team shifted from administrative investigation to combat readiness in seconds. And Vera Mitchell, the quiet maintenance contractor, who had been apologetically checking equipment serial numbers 30 minutes earlier, transformed into something entirely different. Her movement toward the rifle rack was fluid and purposeful, her hands finding the M40A6 with the muscle memory of someone who had performed the same action countless times under far worse circumstances. The safety inspection that followed took exactly 4 seconds and covered every critical system with mechanical precision. "Ma'am, you need to take cover," Williams shouted, his training demanding that he protect the civilian contractor from the developing threat. Vera looked at him with eyes that held no trace of fear or confusion, only the cold assessment of a professional evaluating tactical requirements. "Sergeant, how many confirmed hostiles?" The question, delivered with calm authority that cut through the chaos, made Williams pause. Civilians didn't ask tactical questions during active attacks. They asked about safety, about evacuation, about when help would arrive. They didn't assess threat parameters with the detached professionalism of someone calculating engagement options. "Ma'am, that's not your concern right now. We need to get you to safety." But even as Williams spoke, the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the north perimeter, close enough to confirm that whatever was happening was immediate and deadly. The distinctive crack of assault rifles, mixed with the heavier reports of squad automatic weapons, created a symphony of violence that sent every Marine present into combat mode. Except for Vera, who simply adjusted her grip on the rifle and settled into a shooting position that Harrison recognized as textbook, perfect for long-range precision work. "Master Sergeant," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision, "permission to assist with defensive operations." The request, delivered with calm professionalism while gunfire echoed across the base, crystallized every suspicion Harrison had been developing over the past hour. This wasn't a maintenance contractor requesting permission to help. This was an operator asking for authorization to engage. Before Harrison could respond, movement in the tree line caught his attention. Muzzle flashes were visible among the distant foliage, indicating hostile positions at ranges that would challenge even the Marine snipers present. Blake and his team were scrambling for their weapons, their earlier confidence replaced by the grim focus that live combat demanded. But their movements carried the slight uncertainty of Marines who'd trained extensively for this moment but had never faced it in reality. Vera displayed no such uncertainty. Her positioning was already optimal for engaging targets at the ranges where the muzzle flashes were appearing. Her breathing had shifted into the controlled rhythm that snipers use to manage shot timing. Most tellingly, her entire demeanor projected the calm confidence of someone who'd been in similar situations before and understood exactly what needed to be done. Harrison made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. Permission granted. Engage at will. The transformation that followed removed any remaining doubt about Vera's true identity. The mild-mannered contractor disappeared completely, replaced by a precision instrument of warfare that began engaging targets with mechanical efficiency. Her first shot rang out across the range with authority that commanded immediate attention. Through his binoculars, Harrison watched a muzzle flash in the distant tree line wink out permanently. The second shot followed 8 seconds later, eliminating another hostile position with the same cold precision. Blake, still struggling to process what he was witnessing, stared at Vera with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just been shattered. "Who the hell are you?" Vera didn't answer immediately. She was too focused on identifying and eliminating threats that the other Marines couldn't even see clearly through their optics. Her third and fourth shots were delivered with the steady rhythm of someone who had performed similar tasks countless times before. Only when the immediate threats had been neutralized did she look up from her scope to meet Blake's stunned gaze. Someone who's very good at her job. The simple statement, delivered while smoke drifted from the barrel of her rifle, and the echo of her shots still rang across the range, carried implications that would reshape everything the Marines thought that they understood about the woman they'd spent the morning mocking. But even as the immediate tactical situation stabilized, Harrison realized that the most dangerous revelation was yet to come. Because if Vera Mitchell was capable of the kind of precision shooting he'd just witnessed, if she possessed the tactical awareness and combat experience her behavior suggested, then her presence at Camp Lejeune under a maintenance contractor cover identity raised questions that extended far beyond simple administrative confusion. Questions that would require answers from people with security clearances far above his own level. And as the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air, Harrison understood that those answers were about to arrive whether anyone was prepared for them or not. The helicopters Harrison heard approaching weren't reinforcements. They were part of something far more coordinated and deadly than anyone on the range had realized. As the aircraft passed overhead without landing, their distinctive sound pattern triggered a memory in Vera's tactical consciousness that made her blood run cold. "Everyone down!" she shouted with an authority that cut through the confusion like a blade. "Those aren't our birds!" Her warning came just as the first rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the range, impacting the equipment shed in an explosion that sent debris flying in all directions. The Marines scattered for cover, their training finally overriding their confusion about the situation. But Blake Morrison, his ego still wounded by the morning's revelations, and his mind struggling to process the rapid escalation of events, made a fatal error in judgment. Instead of seeking cover like the others, he grabbed Vera's arm with violent force. "This is your fault somehow," he snarled, his grip tightening as panic and rage clouded his thinking. "You're connected to this attack." Vera tried to pull away gently, her voice remaining calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "Sergeant, we need to focus on the immediate threat. Let me help." But Blake's psychological pressure valve had finally burst. Months of unchallenged authority, years of believing his own propaganda about Marine superiority, and the devastating blow to his self-image delivered by Vera's impossible marksmanship had created a perfect storm of misdirected fury. "Help?" Blake's laugh carried a note of hysteria as another explosion rocked the range. "You've been playing us from the beginning. Nobody shoots like that without serious training." His grip on her arm tightened to the point of causing pain, and when Vera tried to twist away, Blake's other hand shot out to grab the collar of her gray t-shirt. The fabric, already worn thin by countless washings, couldn't withstand the violent force of his desperate grab. The ripping sound was lost in the chaos of gunfire and explosions, but the visual impact was immediate and undeniable. As the torn fabric fell away from Vera's neck and upper shoulders, it revealed something that made every Marine within sight freeze in place despite the active combat situation unfolding around them. Etched into the skin at the base of her neck, in stark black ink that seemed to absorb the morning light, was a barcode tattoo unlike anything they'd ever seen. The parallel lines were precisely rendered, each mark positioned with mathematical accuracy. Below the barcode, in crisp military lettering that left no room for misinterpretation, was a designation that existed only in the nightmares of enemy combatants: Raven 17. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Master Sergeant Harrison, who'd been moving toward cover when Blake grabbed Vera, stopped so suddenly that he nearly lost his balance. His weathered face went pale as recognition hit him like a physical blow. Holy cow! Derek Hayes, whose phone had been recording what he'd thought would be continued harassment footage, watched his screen with growing horror as the camera captured something that wasn't supposed to exist. His hands began trembling so violently that the image shook, That's not possible. Grace Coleman, crouched behind an overturned table, stared at the exposed tattoo with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just shifted. She'd heard stories, whispered legends about operators who didn't officially exist, but seeing the proof etched into living skin was something else entirely. Lieutenant Carter Brooks, his tablet still displaying Vera's incomplete background information, felt his knees buckle as the pieces finally clicked into place. The security clearances that didn't make sense for a maintenance contractor, the deployment records that were too heavily redacted for routine assignments, the administrative confusion that now looked like deliberate misdirection. But it was Blake's reaction that captured the full horror of the moment. His grip on Vera's torn shirt went slack as he stumbled backward, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and something approaching terror. "Raven 17, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the continuing gunfire. "The ghost sniper. But you're supposed to be dead." The designation hung in the air like a curse. Raven 17 wasn't just a call sign. It was a legend that had achieved mythical status among military personnel worldwide. Stories were told in hushed voices about impossible shots made under impossible circumstances, about a sniper who could eliminate targets at ranges that defied conventional understanding of ballistics and physics. More importantly, Raven 17 had been officially declared killed in action during Operation Ashfall in 2018, a classified mission so secret that most people weren't certain it had actually occurred. The death had been mourned privately by those few who knew the truth about the operator's contributions to national security. Vera stood amid the chaos, her torn shirt hanging from her shoulders, the barcode tattoo exposed to more than a dozen witnesses whose phones were capturing every detail. For the first time since arriving at the range, her carefully maintained cover was completely blown. "I was never dead," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone lean in despite the ongoing combat. "Just resting." The simple statement, delivered while explosions continued to rock the base around them, carried implications that reached far beyond the immediate tactical situation. If Raven 17 was alive, if she'd been operating under deep cover for years, then her presence at Camp Lejeune wasn't administrative confusion, it was operational necessity. Harrison's tactical mind processed the revelation faster than the others. "The attack. You knew this was coming." Vera nodded slightly, her eyes already scanning the tree line for target acquisition opportunities. Intel suggested possible hostile action against this facility. "I was positioned here to provide overwatch and rapid response capability." Blake, still struggling to process the magnitude of his error, stared at the woman he had spent the morning humiliating. We were harassing a legend, a ghost operative." "You were harassing a maintenance contractor doing her job," Vera corrected gently. "The other thing was need to know, and you didn't need to know. If your heart is racing right now with this attack happening, wondering how anyone could handle this impossible situation, you're not alone. Hit that like button if you're ready for the truth about who Vera really is. The reveal coming up will change everything." The sound of approaching vehicles drew everyone's attention toward the main access road, where a convoy of unmarked SUVs was approaching at high speed. These weren't military police or base security. They moved with the precision and coordination that suggested a much higher level of response. But before the cavalry could arrive, the immediate tactical situation demanded attention. The attack on the north perimeter had been a diversion, drawing base security away from the real target, the Marine sniper training facility and the classified weapons systems being tested there. Vera understood this immediately. Her positioning at the range hadn't been coincidental maintenance scheduling. It had been operational placement by people who understood that Camp Lejeune would be targeted and that conventional security measures would be insufficient. "Master Sergeant," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command in crisis situations, "this facility contains classified weapons technology that cannot be allowed to fall into hostile hands. We need to establish a defensive perimeter immediately." Harrison nodded, his years of experience recognizing competent leadership regardless of its source. "What do you need?" "Clear fields of fire to the north and east approaches. Your sniper team positioned for overwatch and target designation. And someone needs to secure the equipment that these people came here to steal." As if summoned by her words, movement erupted from multiple directions simultaneously. The coordinated attack that had been building throughout the morning finally revealed its true scope and sophistication. Teams of armed individuals emerged from concealed positions in the surrounding forest, their movements displaying the kind of tactical coordination that indicated extensive planning and professional training. These weren't random terrorists or opportunistic criminals. They were operators executing a carefully designed mission against a specific target. Vera's response was immediate and devastating. She acquired her first target before most of the Marines had even identified the threat vectors, her shot eliminating a hostile attempting to establish a rocket launcher position at 600 meters. Her second shot, delivered 4 seconds later, took down a sniper who'd been positioning himself to eliminate the Marine leadership. The third shot disrupted a communications specialist whose equipment would have coordinated the assault. Each shot was placed with surgical precision at ranges that challenged the capabilities of the weapon system, under combat conditions that would have rattled experienced snipers. But Vera displayed no stress, no uncertainty, no deviation from the mechanical efficiency that had made Raven 17 a legend. Blake and his sniper team, watching their equipment being operated at a level they'd never imagined possible, began to understand exactly how outclassed they'd been from the moment Vera arrived at their range. "She's not just good," Derek whispered, his phone still recording despite his trembling hands. "She's operating at a completely different level." Grace Coleman, whose respect for competence had been instilled through months of military training, felt something approaching awe as she watched Vera systematically dismantling an assault that would have overwhelmed conventional defenders. But the true scope of the operation became clear when Harrison's radio crackled with reports from around the base. The attack on the north perimeter had been simultaneous with assaults on the communications center, the motor pool, and the administrative complex. Camp Lejeune was under coordinated attack from multiple directions by forces that understood military tactics and had planned their operation with inside knowledge of base security procedures. "All stations, this is base operations. We have multiple breaches. Repeat, we have hostile forces at multiple locations. All personnel implement Bravo protocols immediately." The transmission confirmed what Vera had suspected from the beginning. This wasn't a random attack or terrorist incident. It was a professional operation designed to acquire specific assets while overwhelming the base's defensive capabilities. And she was the only person present with the training and experience necessary to prevent mission success. The legal framework protecting classified military personnel like Raven 17 required specialized attorneys with top-secret clearances and expertise in military law. These legal professionals, trained in both constitutional rights and national security protocols, provided comprehensive legal protection services that could navigate the complex intersection of civilian identity protection and classified military operations. The convoy of SUVs reached the range entrance and disgorged personnel whose appearance immediately elevated the security classification of everything happening. Men and women in civilian clothes, but with military bearings spread out in tactical formations that spoke of extensive special operations training. Their leader, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair, and the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention, approached Harrison with the purposeful stride of someone whose authority transcended normal military hierarchy. "Master Sergeant Harrison, I'm Colonel Sarah Patterson, Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to secure this area immediately." Harrison straightened to attention, recognizing both the rank and the organization. DIA involvement meant that the morning's events had implications extending far beyond base security. "Yes, ma'am. We have one confirmed friendly operator engaging multiple hostiles. Raven 17 is active and operational." Colonel Patterson's expression shifted from professional concern to something approaching relief. Thank God. We weren't certain she was in position. The revelation that Vera's presence had been anticipated, that her cover identity had been part of a larger operational plan, completed the picture for Harrison. The administrative confusion, the timing of the attack, the sophisticated nature of the assault, everything had been orchestrated by people operating at levels far above his security clearance. Vera paused in her target engagement long enough to acknowledge Patterson's arrival with a slight nod. "Colonel, status on the other objectives?" "Secured. Your intelligence was accurate. They hit exactly where you predicted they would." The exchange confirmed what Harrison had begun to suspect. Vera hadn't just been positioned at the range to respond to an attack. She'd been instrumental in predicting and preparing for it. Her maintenance contractor cover had allowed her to assess vulnerabilities and establish defensive positioning without alerting potential hostiles to the presence of high-level security measures. Blake Morrison, still processing the magnitude of his morning's mistakes, stared at the woman he'd attempted to humiliate. "You've been planning this whole thing. Planning to defend this facility and protect the personnel assigned to it," Vera corrected, "including you and your team, despite your best efforts to compromise operational security." The mild rebuke carried more weight than any shouted reprimand could have delivered. Blake realized that his harassment hadn't just been unprofessional, it had potentially endangered a classified operation designed to protect American military assets. The sound of helicopters returned, but this time they were unmistakably American military aircraft. Apache gunships swept over the tree line, their presence immediately shifting the tactical balance of the engagement. Vera's radio crackled with communications in a frequency and format that confirmed her integration with operational command structures far above the base level. "Raven 17, this is Overwatch. Area secured. All hostiles neutralized or in custody. Outstanding work." She acknowledged the transmission with professional brevity, then safed her weapon and turned to address the assembled Marines who'd witnessed her transformation from maintenance contractor to operational asset. "The immediate threat has been neutralized. Your facility is secure." Harrison stepped forward, his expression mixing respect with curiosity about details that his security clearance probably wouldn't allow him to access. "Ma'am, will you be maintaining your cover identity?" Vera looked down at her torn shirt and the exposed tattoo that had revealed her true identity to more than a dozen witnesses with active social media accounts. "I think that ship has sailed, Master Sergeant." Colonel Patterson approached with a tablet displaying information that made her frown. "We have a problem. The engagement was recorded and transmitted before we could implement communications blackout. Raven 17's identity is compromised." The implications were immediate and serious. If Vera's identity as a living operator became public knowledge, it would compromise not just her future operational utility, but potentially endanger other assets and operations connected to her previous missions. Derek Hayes, whose phone had captured the entire sequence of events, suddenly found himself the center of attention from people whose interest in his social media content was decidedly unfriendly. "Son," Colonel Patterson said with deceptive mildness, "I'm going to need that device. National security." Derek's face went pale as he realized that his pursuit of viral content had collided with classified military operations in ways that could have serious legal consequences. But Vera intervened before the situation could escalate. "Colonel, the recording might actually serve our purposes. Sometimes the best way to hide something is in plain sight." Patterson raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the suggestion. "Explain." "Let the story spread, but control the narrative. Raven 17 comes out of deep cover to defend American military personnel from terrorist attack. The ghost becomes real, but for purposes that serve operational security rather than compromise it." The proposal represented a radical departure from standard operational security protocols, but Patterson's expression suggested she was considering the possibilities. If managed correctly, Vera's exposure could become an asset rather than a liability. Harrison watched the exchange with growing understanding of the complexities involved in operations that existed at the intersection of national security and public awareness. These people operated in a world where truth and deception were tactical tools to be deployed based on operational requirements rather than moral absolutes. Grace Coleman, who had been quietly observing the aftermath of the engagement, approached Vera with the hesitant respect that extraordinary competence commanded. "Ma'am, could I ask, how long have you been doing this?" Vera considered the question while adjusting her torn shirt to maintain some degree of modesty. "Too long, Private, but sometimes the job requires certain sacrifices." The simple statement carried implications about a life spent in service to missions that couldn't be acknowledged, protecting people who would never know her name, operating in shadows that demanded personal sacrifices most people couldn't imagine. Blake Morrison, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated, struggled to find words adequate to the situation. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. I treated you with complete disrespect." Vera looked at him with eyes that held neither anger nor forgiveness, just the tired patience of someone who'd endured worse treatment in service to people who deserved better from those sworn to protect them. "Sergeant Morrison, you treated someone you perceived as beneath your notice with the casual cruelty that power often breeds. The fact that your target happened to be someone with capabilities you didn't recognize doesn't make the behavior more or less acceptable." The observation carried a weight that extended beyond the immediate situation. It was a lesson about respect, about human dignity, about the responsibilities that came with authority, and the dangers of assumptions based on appearance or apparent status. Colonel Patterson's tablet chimed with incoming information that made her expression grow serious. "We have confirmation on the hostile organization. They were after the new targeting systems being tested here. Without intervention, they would have succeeded." Harrison felt a chill as he realized how close they'd come to a catastrophic security breach. The weapons systems stored at the range represented years of development and millions of dollars in investment. More importantly, their compromise could have given hostile forces capabilities that would endanger American personnel worldwide. "How did they know about the testing schedule?" he asked. "That's still under investigation," Patterson replied, "but preliminary analysis suggests inside information was involved." The revelation that the attack had been enabled by someone with access to classified information added another layer of complexity to the morning's events. If Vera's presence had been part of a counterintelligence operation designed to identify and neutralize a security leak, then her maintenance contractor cover had served multiple purposes. Derek Hayes, still holding his phone but no longer recording, raised a hesitant hand. "Ma'am, what happens to the footage we already captured?" Patterson studied him with the calculating gaze of someone assessing security risks and operational opportunities. "That depends on your willingness to cooperate with national security interests, young man." The implied threat was clear, but Vera's suggested approach offered a different path forward. Instead of suppressing the story, they could shape it to serve their purposes while protecting operational details that needed to remain classified. "Derek," Vera said, using his first name for the first time, "you have an opportunity to tell a story about American heroes defending their country against terrorist attack. That's a story worth telling." The suggestion offered redemption for his earlier behavior while serving operational security requirements. Derek nodded eagerly, recognizing both the opportunity and the implicit warning about the consequences of misusing the material he'd captured. As the immediate aftermath of the engagement continued to unfold, Harrison realized that the morning's events represented something more significant than a successful counterterrorism operation. They marked the emergence of a new model for protecting American military assets, one that relied on operators like Vera Mitchell, who could function in multiple identities while maintaining the capabilities necessary to respond to threats that conventional security measures couldn't address. The transformation from Vera, the maintenance contractor, to Raven 17, the legendary sniper, would reshape how everyone present understood the relationship between appearance and capability, between official identity and operational reality. But most importantly, it would serve as a lasting reminder that the most dangerous person in any room might be the one that everyone else chose to overlook. As helicopters continued to circle overhead and cleanup teams began processing the detained hostiles, Vera Mitchell stood amid the debris of her blown cover, no longer the quiet maintenance worker who'd arrived that morning, but not yet whatever she would become next. The barcode tattoo at the base of her neck, now visible to anyone who cared to look, served as a permanent reminder that some ghosts never truly died. They just learned new ways to haunt the enemies of the nation they'd sworn to protect. And in the distance, encrypted communications were already flowing between agencies and organizations whose existence most Americans never suspected, planning the next phase of operations that would keep the country safe from threats that conventional military forces were never designed to handle. The war continued, fought in shadows by people whose names would never appear in history books, whose sacrifices would never be publicly acknowledged, whose victories would be measured not in territory gained or enemies defeated, but in attacks prevented and lives saved. Heroes like Raven 17, who understood that the highest form of service was the kind that nobody ever knew you'd performed. The immediate aftermath of Raven 17's exposure created ripple effects that extended far beyond the smoking ruins of the terrorist attack. As Colonel Patterson coordinated with her DIA team to process the detained hostiles and secure the compromised weapons systems, the human cost of the morning's revelations began to manifest in ways that would reshape lives and careers. Blake Morrison sat on an overturned ammunition crate, his hands trembling with a combination of adrenaline, crash, and existential shock. The man who had strutted across the range 6 hours earlier, with unshakable confidence in his own superiority, now faced the crushing weight of understanding exactly how wrong he'd been about everything. "Sergeant Morrison," Harrison approached, with the measured steps of someone delivering news that wouldn't be welcome. "Colonel Patterson needs to speak with you." Blake looked up with eyes that had aged years in the space of a morning. "To arrest me? To understand how a classified operation nearly got compromised by personnel who should have been briefed on operational security requirements." The distinction was important. This wasn't just about Blake's personal conduct. It was about systemic failures that had allowed harassment to interfere with national security operations. His treatment of Vera hadn't just been unprofessional, it had potentially endangered a mission designed to protect American military assets. Derek Hayes stood nearby, his phone now secured by DIA technicians who were analyzing the footage for operational security implications. The social media influencer who had built his following on humiliating others now understood that he'd documented something that could have far-reaching consequences for his own future. "Will I face charges?" Derek asked Grace Coleman, who'd been designated as his liaison while the investigation proceeded. Grace considered the question with the careful thought that her new role demanded. Over the past few hours, she'd been promoted twice, first to corporal for her defense of Vera during the harassment, then to staff sergeant for her performance during the actual attack. Her trajectory from private to senior, enlisted in a single day, was unprecedented. But then again, everything about this day had been unprecedented. "That depends on your cooperation with the investigation and your willingness to support the cover story that's being developed," Grace replied. "The footage you captured could be valuable for operational purposes if it's handled correctly." The cover story Patterson's team was constructing represented a masterpiece of controlled disclosure. Instead of suppressing the videos entirely, they would release edited versions that showed Raven 17 defending American personnel from terrorist attack without revealing operational details that could compromise future missions. The narrative would be simple. A decorated veteran working undercover to protect classified assets had been forced to reveal her identity to save American lives. It was truthful enough to withstand scrutiny while serving operational security requirements. Vera herself had withdrawn to a secure communications area where she was participating in encrypted video conferences with officials whose names appeared on no public organizational charts. The revelation of her survival had triggered emergency protocols at multiple agencies, each scrambling to assess the implications for ongoing operations. "Raven 17, this is unprecedented," the voice from Washington carried the strain of someone whose carefully planned operations had just been turned upside down. "Your exposure compromises 17 different cover identities and 43 active operations." "Understood," Vera replied with the calm professionalism that had sustained her through worse crises. But the alternative was allowing hostile forces to acquire targeting systems that would have cost American lives on a much larger scale. The calculation was brutal but necessary. Her exposure would indeed compromise other operations, but the weapon systems the terrorists had been attempting to steal would have endangered thousands of American personnel worldwide if successfully acquired. "We're developing new protocols based on this incident," another voice added. "The Ghost program needs to evolve beyond traditional operational security models." The conversation continued for another hour, covering details that would reshape how America's most sensitive operations were conducted. Vera's forced revelation had demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of deep cover operations in an age where every citizen carried recording devices and social media could spread classified information globally within minutes. That barcode tattoo reveal just shattered everyone's world, including yours. If you need to see more stories about people whose true identities shock everyone around them, subscribe now. Comment below. Have you ever completely misjudged someone based on their appearance? While Vera participated in classified briefings, the consequences of the morning's events were already cascading through the base in ways that would be felt for years to come. The 6-layer consequence system that Patterson's analysts had predicted was unfolding with mechanical precision. The immediate scene consequences were the most visible. Blake Morrison found himself stripped of his instructor qualifications and transferred to administrative duties pending a full investigation. His security clearance was suspended, and his access to classified materials revoked indefinitely. Derek Hayes faced military discipline for unauthorized recording of classified operations, though the severity would depend on his cooperation with the cover story development. His social media accounts were temporarily suspended, while DIA technicians scrubbed them for content that could compromise operational security. Lieutenant Carter Brooks, whose background checks had failed to identify the administrative irregularities that should have indicated Vera's true status, faced a formal reprimand and mandatory retraining on security protocols. But the personal ripple effects extended far beyond military discipline. Blake's family received notification that he was under investigation for conduct unbecoming a Marine officer. The details were classified, but the implications were clear enough to devastate his wife and children, who had built their identities around his military success. Derek's parents, proud military veterans themselves, learned through official channels that their son was involved in a classified incident that could result in federal charges. The shame of having their family name associated with potential security violations was almost unbearable. Grace Coleman's family, conversely, received congratulations for her daughter's exceptional performance under combat conditions. Her rapid promotion from private to staff sergeant in a single day was virtually unprecedented and would open doors that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. The professional impacts were equally dramatic. Blake's instructor certification was revoked permanently, ending a career path that had defined his identity for over a decade. His hopes of advancing to senior enlisted ranks evaporated, replaced by the likelihood of administrative separation from the Marine Corps. Derek's military career faced similar devastation. His specialty in communications and social media, previously seen as valuable for modern military recruitment, now marked him as a security risk. His technical skills would be redirected toward less sensitive applications, assuming he avoided criminal charges. Grace's trajectory, meanwhile, accelerated beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Her defense of Vera and performance during the attack had marked her for advanced training and leadership development. Colonel Patterson had personally recommended her for the Marine Corps' most prestigious leadership programs. Community transformation was perhaps the most profound consequence. Word of the morning's event spread through Camp Lejeune with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. By evening, every Marine on base knew that they'd been home to something extraordinary, and that their treatment of seemingly ordinary people would never be the same. The story that emerged, carefully crafted by Patterson's information warfare specialists, focused on themes of heroism, sacrifice, and the hidden veterans who continued to serve their country in ways that couldn't be acknowledged. It was inspiring without being compromising, truthful without being complete. Local veteran organizations embraced the narrative with enthusiasm that surprised even Patterson's team. Within hours of the story's release, social media was flooded with posts about hidden heroes and the importance of treating everyone with respect. The hashtag Hidden Heroes began trending nationally, driven by veterans sharing their own stories of underestimated service members. Institutional changes were already being implemented at the highest levels of military command. The Marine Corps announced a comprehensive review of instructor qualification standards, focusing on character assessment and respect for personnel, regardless of rank or apparent status. New protocols for handling civilian contractors on military installations were developed, requiring multiple levels of verification and cross-checking to prevent the kind of administrative confusion that had nearly compromised Vera's operation. Most significantly, the incident prompted a complete reassessment of how classified personnel operated in civilian environments. The GHOST program, previously dependent on complete secrecy, would evolve to incorporate controlled disclosure protocols that could maintain operational security while providing necessary cover for action when circumstances required it. Harrison stood in the base commander's office, receiving a briefing on changes that would reshape his responsibilities as senior enlisted advisor. The transformation went beyond policy updates. It represented a fundamental shift in military culture toward greater awareness of the hidden complexities in seemingly simple situations. Master Sergeant, you'll be implementing new training protocols that emphasize respect and situational awareness, Colonel Reed Patterson, no relation to the DIA colonel, explained. What happened here today can never happen again. Harrison nodded, understanding that his role now included preventing the kind of harassment that had nearly compromised a classified operation. Yes, sir. The Mitchell protocols will become standard training for all personnel. The legacy consequences were perhaps the most far-reaching. Vera Mitchell's story would become required reading for military personnel worldwide, a case study in the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their apparent status or role. Professional military education curricula would incorporate scenarios based on the morning's events, challenging students to consider how their assumptions about others might compromise mission effectiveness. The story would join the canon of military legends that shaped cultural understanding of service, sacrifice, and respect. Blake Morrison's name would also become part of military education, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of character in leadership positions. His fall from instructor to security risk would be studied in leadership courses as an example of how personal failings could have national security implications. Grace Coleman's rapid rise would inspire countless young Marines, proving that character and competence could overcome traditional barriers to advancement. Her story would be particularly powerful for female Marines, demonstrating that standing up for what's right could lead to extraordinary opportunities. As the sun set over Camp Lejeune, the transformation was already visible. Marines moved differently, spoke more carefully, treated everyone they encountered with a level of respect that hadn't existed that morning. The casual cruelty that Blake had exemplified was replaced by awareness that anyone could be more than they appeared. Vera emerged from her classified briefings to find a base that had been fundamentally changed by her forced revelation. The maintenance contractor identity that had served her for months was completely burned, but something more valuable had taken its place. An opportunity to reshape how America's military treated the hidden heroes in their midst. Colonel Patterson approached with a tablet displaying preliminary analysis of the attack and its aftermath. The threat assessment team has completed their initial review. This was definitely an inside job. Someone with access to classified scheduling information provided the targeting data. The revelation that the attack had been enabled by an insider added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Vera's presence hadn't just prevented a catastrophic security breach. It had exposed a traitor whose activities could have endangered American personnel worldwide. Any leads on the source? Vera asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. We're working through the possibilities. The list of people with access to the relevant information is shorter than you might expect, but it includes some very high-level personnel. The counterintelligence implications were staggering. If someone with sufficient access had been providing information to hostile forces, the damage could extend far beyond a single failed attack. Every operation, every deployment, every classified program could be compromised. I'll be staying to assist with the investigation, Vera decided. My cover's blown anyway, and this is personal now. Patterson nodded approval. We were hoping you'd say that. Your operational experience and security clearance make you invaluable for this kind of investigation. The decision to remain at Camp Lejeune represented a significant shift in Vera's operational status. For the first time in years, she would be working under her real identity, rather than a carefully constructed cover. The freedom was both liberating and terrifying. Grace Coleman approached with the hesitant respect that extraordinary revelations commanded. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for everything you did today, and for the way you handled the harassment earlier. Vera studied the young Marine who'd risked her own career to defend someone she thought was just a civilian contractor. You stood up for what was right when it mattered, Staff Sergeant. That takes more courage than most people understand. The use of Grace's new rank was deliberate acknowledgement of how much her life had changed in a single day, from private to Staff Sergeant, from anonymous enlisted to someone whose name would be remembered in Marine Corps history. What happens now? Grace asked. Now, you continue serving with the same character you showed today. You'll face challenges and opportunities that will test everything you believe about leadership and service. But if you remember that respect isn't conditional on rank or appearance, you'll do fine. The advice carried weight beyond the immediate situation. Grace was being prepared for responsibilities that would extend far beyond her current role, opportunities that would allow her to shape the military culture of the future. Blake Morrison appeared in the distance, escorted by military police toward a building where his formal debriefing would take place. His career was effectively over, but the investigation would determine whether criminal charges would follow. Vera watched his departure with emotions that were complex and contradictory. Blake had treated her with casual cruelty that could have compromised a critical operation, but he was also a Marine whose life was being destroyed by consequences he'd never intended to create. Ma'am, Grace followed her gaze, do you think he'll be all right? That depends on what he does with this experience. Some people learn from catastrophic failure and become better than they ever were before. Others are destroyed by it. Sergeant Morrison will have to decide which kind of person he wants to be. The observation reflected years of experience with people who had faced similar crossroads. Vera had seen careers ended by single moments of poor judgment, but she'd also seen remarkable redemptions by those who chose to learn from their failures. The comprehensive legal framework protecting classified military personnel like Raven 17 required specialized attorneys with top-secret clearances and expertise in military law. These legal professionals, trained in both constitutional rights and national security protocols, provided comprehensive legal protection services that could navigate the complex intersection of civilian identity protection and classified military operations. The incident at Camp Lejeune would require unprecedented coordination between military justice, civilian law enforcement, and intelligence agencies to ensure that operational security was maintained while appropriate consequences were administered. Derek Hayes was released from DIA custody with conditions that would govern his behavior for the foreseeable future. His cooperation with the cover story development had earned him immunity from prosecution, but his military career would be closely monitored to prevent future security incidents. "I want to apologize," Derek approached Vera as she prepared to leave the range. "For everything. The recording, the harassment, the complete disrespect. I was trying to be entertaining, but I was just being cruel." Vera accepted the apology with the grace that had sustained her through worse treatment. "You have an opportunity now to use your skills and platform to tell better stories, stories that honor service instead of mocking it. That's worth more than any apology." The suggestion offered Derek a path toward redemption that aligned with operational security requirements. His social media following could become an asset for positive military narratives rather than a liability for security breaches. As darkness fell over Camp Lejeune, the base settled into a new normal that bore little resemblance to the morning's routine. Security protocols had been elevated, personnel had been briefed on operational security requirements, and everyone understood that their installation had been the site of something that would be studied and remembered for decades. Vera retreated to quarters that had been hastily prepared for her extended stay. The room was spartanly furnished but secure, with communications equipment that would allow her to participate in the ongoing investigation while maintaining appropriate security protocols. Her first encrypted call was to an office in Washington whose location appeared on no public maps. The voice that answered carried the weight of someone whose decisions affected national security at the highest levels. "Raven 17, your exposure has created both problems and opportunities. We're developing new operational protocols based on what happened today." "Understood. What's the assessment of ongoing security risks?" "The insider threat is our primary concern. Someone with extraordinary access provided the targeting information for today's attack. We need to identify and neutralize that threat before other operations are compromised." The conversation continued for over an hour, covering details that would reshape how America's most sensitive operations were conducted. Vera's forced revelation had demonstrated that the traditional model of complete operational secrecy was no longer sustainable in an age of ubiquitous surveillance and instant global communication. New protocols would incorporate controlled disclosure strategies that could maintain operational security while providing necessary flexibility for operators who might need to reveal their capabilities under extreme circumstances. The morning's events had also highlighted the importance of cultural preparation for classified operations. Blake's harassment hadn't just been unprofessional, it had demonstrated a fundamental failure to understand that anyone could be more than they appeared. Future training would emphasize respect, situational awareness, and the understanding that America's security often depended on people whose contributions couldn't be publicly acknowledged. After completing her briefings, Vera stood on the balcony of her temporary quarters and looked out over Camp Lejeune. The base that had begun the day as just another assignment had become something more significant, a place where operational security had collided with human nature in ways that would influence military culture for generations. Her phone rang with an encrypted call that immediately commanded her attention. The caller identification showed only a series of numbers that indicated the highest levels of governmental authority. "Raven 17, this is urgent. We have a situation developing that requires your immediate attention." The voice was unfamiliar, but the protocols and encryption methods confirmed legitimate authority. Vera straightened unconsciously, her mind shifting into operational mode. "I'm listening." "3 of our most valuable assets have gone dark in Iraq. Their last communication indicated they were pursuing intelligence related to the insider threat that compromised today's operation. We need someone with your specific skill set to locate and extract them." The request represented a dramatic escalation from the morning's events. If the insider threat extended to operations in Iraq, the implications for American personnel worldwide were staggering. What's the timeline? Transport leaves in 6 hours. You'll be briefing with the extraction team during flight. This is classified at the highest levels. Operational details are compartmentalized beyond normal protocols. Vera understood the implications. This wasn't just another mission. It was a direct continuation of the investigation that had begun with the attack on Camp Lejeune. The insider who had provided targeting information for the morning's assault was potentially responsible for endangering American assets across multiple theaters of operation. "I'll be ready." The call ended, leaving Vera with 5 hours to prepare for a mission that would take her from the familiar environment of Camp Lejeune to the complex and dangerous world of Middle Eastern intelligence operations. She began the methodical process of preparing for deployment, checking equipment, and reviewing intelligence files on a tablet that displayed information too sensitive for conventional computer systems. The 3 missing assets were operators whose capture or death would represent a significant loss to American intelligence capabilities. More concerning was the possibility that their disappearance was connected to the same intelligence leak that had enabled the attack on Camp Lejeune. If hostile forces were systematically targeting American assets using information provided by an insider, the damage could extend far beyond individual operations. Grace Coleman appeared at her door with orders that had been delivered through official channels. "Ma'am, Colonel Patterson requests your presence for a final briefing before departure." The briefing took place in a secure facility that Vera hadn't known existed on the base. The room was equipped with the kind of communications and analysis equipment that indicated capabilities far beyond normal military operations. Patterson and her team had assembled a comprehensive picture of the threat that was both impressive and terrifying. The attack on Camp Lejeune had been part of a coordinated campaign against American military assets worldwide. Similar incidents had occurred at installations in Germany, Japan, and South Korea, all apparently enabled by inside information. "The pattern suggests someone with access to global operational schedules and security protocols," Patterson explained. "The level of access required means we're looking at a very small number of potential suspects." Vera studied the evidence with the analytical skills that had made her invaluable for the most sensitive operations. The coordination and timing of the attacks indicated not just access to classified information, but understanding of how to use that information most effectively. Any communication intercepts that might indicate coordination? Several, but they're using encryption methods that suggest state-level support. This isn't a lone insider, it's part of a larger intelligence operation. The revelation elevated the threat assessment significantly. If a foreign intelligence service had successfully placed assets within American military command structures, the implications for national security were almost unimaginable. "The mission in Iraq is designed to identify and neutralize the source of the intelligence leaks," Patterson continued. "The 3 missing assets were investigating connections between the insider threat and foreign intelligence services. Their disappearance suggests they discovered something significant." Vera nodded, understanding that her deployment represented far more than a simple extraction mission. She would be walking into a complex intelligence operation where the distinction between friend and enemy might not be immediately clear. Rules of engagement? Whatever it takes to protect American assets and neutralize the threat. You have full operational authority and unlimited resources. The authorization was broader than anything Vera had received for previous missions, indicating the severity with which her superiors viewed the situation. She would essentially be operating as a one-person task force with the authority to take whatever action circumstances required. As the briefing concluded, Vera realized that her exposure at Camp Lejeune had been the beginning rather than the end of her involvement in this crisis. The barcode tattoo that had revealed her identity to a dozen Marines would soon be visible to hostile forces who understood exactly what Raven 17 represented. The ghost was about to become very real in ways that would test everything she'd learned about survival, mission accomplishment, and the price of service to something larger than herself. Grace Coleman escorted her to the airfield where a military transport was waiting with engines already running. The aircraft's configuration indicated long-range capability and the kind of electronic warfare equipment that suggested operations in heavily contested environments. "Ma'am," Grace said as they approached the aircraft, "I wanted you to know that what happened today changed everything for a lot of people. Not just the bad consequences for those who deserved them, but the good ones for people who needed to see that character matters." Vera paused at the foot of the aircraft's boarding ramp. "Staff Sergeant Coleman, You have an opportunity now to influence military culture in ways that will protect people like the contractor you thought I was this morning. Use it well." The advice carried the weight of years spent observing how institutional culture shaped individual behavior. Grace's rapid promotion had given her influence that could prevent future incidents like Blake's harassment campaign. "I will, ma'am, and ma'am, come back safe." Vera boarded the aircraft with the understanding that her return was far from guaranteed. The mission ahead would take her into environments where her exposure as Raven 17 made her a high-value target for multiple intelligence services. But as the aircraft lifted off from Camp Lejeune and turned toward the Middle East, she carried with her the knowledge that the morning's events had already achieved something valuable. The base she was leaving behind was a place where respect had replaced casual cruelty, where everyone understood that appearances could be deceiving, and where the hidden heroes of American security could operate with the dignity their service deserved. The war against those who would harm America continued, fought in shadows by people whose names would never appear in history books. But sometimes, when circumstances required it, those shadows would step into the light to remind everyone what true service looked like. As the transport aircraft disappeared into the night sky, Camp Lejeune settled into a new routine shaped by the understanding that heroism often wore the most ordinary disguises. The maintenance contractor who had been mocked that morning had become a legend that would inspire Marines for generations. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, 3 missing Americans waited for rescue by a ghost who'd learned that the most important battles were fought by people whom everyone else chose to overlook. The barcode tattoo that had shocked a rifle range in North Carolina would soon be seen in places where legends were born and heroes were made, one precise shot at a time. Raven 17 was hunting again, and the enemies of America were about to discover why some ghosts never truly died. They just learned new ways to protect the innocent and punish those who threatened them. The mission continued, as it always had, as it always would, until every American service member could come home safe, knowing that someone was watching over them from the shadows. Some ghosts never stop hunting. 6 months after the incident at Camp Lejeune, the ripple effects continued to reshape American military culture in ways that no policy manual could have achieved. The story of Vera Mitchell had become more than legend. It had become a standard by which respect and character were measured across all branches of service. Grace Coleman, now a gunnery sergeant and the youngest Marine to hold that rank in over a decade, stood before a new class of recruits at Parris Island. The lesson she taught wasn't about marksmanship or tactics, but about the Mitchell Protocol, the understanding that every person deserved dignity regardless of their apparent role or status. "The most dangerous assumption you can make," she told the wide-eyed recruits, "is that you know who someone is based on what they look like or how they're dressed." That assumption nearly cost American lives and definitely cost careers. Blake Morrison had taken a different path. After his discharge from the Marines, he'd found work with a veterans organization that helped service members transition to civilian life. The humility forced upon him by his catastrophic failure had transformed him into someone who understood the value of second chances and the importance of character over rank. He never spoke publicly about the events at Camp Lejeune. His non-disclosure agreements prevented that. But his work with struggling veterans carried an intensity that suggested he was trying to atone for something significant. Derek Hayes had parlayed his social media skills into a career producing content for military recruitment that emphasized service, sacrifice, and respect. His follower count had actually grown after his forced pivot away from humiliation content, proving that audiences responded to authenticity and positive messaging when it was delivered genuinely. The 3 missing operatives that Vera had been sent to extract had been recovered successfully, though the details remained classified at levels that would never see public disclosure. What mattered was that they'd come home, and the intelligence leak that had endangered them had been permanently closed. Vera herself had returned to the shadows, but not in the same way as before. The Raven 17 identity could never be completely hidden again, but it had evolved into something more powerful, a reminder that America's security depended on people who chose service over recognition, duty over comfort, and honor over ease. In break rooms and briefing halls across the military, the question had become standard. Are you treating this person the way you'd want someone to treat Vera Mitchell? It was a simple test that had transformed countless interactions and prevented innumerable injustices. The Ghost program continued, staffed by operators whose names would never be known, but whose dedication ensured that America's enemies faced consequences they never saw coming. And somewhere in the world, When good people needed protection and bad people needed stopping, shadows moved with purpose and precision, carrying the knowledge that respect wasn't conditional on understanding, and that heroes often wore the most unremarkable disguises.
Behind every uniform is a person trying their best, seeing each other with respect. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to TNG Story.